All right, I have 12 o'clock straight up, so we'll go ahead and get started. We kind of knew it was going to be a smaller group today. I think we're probably hitting the tail end of vacation times and stuff, folks, before we hit the beginning of the semester. So, all right. So for this meeting for Texas Assessment Collaborative, this is Larry and I's contact information. Oh wait, I just hit the wrong button. Yep. All right, so this is the list of participating institutions that we have currently. It hasn't changed any since the last month, and so these are the individuals that, and you have all of their email addresses in the email that I sent out yesterday, or actually this morning, as a reminder to this meeting. For this meeting, just kind of, as I mentioned in the email, kind of go quickly through some old business and touch on those things. And then we do have 3 things that we want to cover today that's new business. One is scoring versus calibration. The other is looking at the demographic data, which is sort of old versus new. And then we also have available with us today Matthew Cayley from LiveText, and he's going to actually do a kind of a high-level conceptual overview to give you a first glimpse of what the system that we're going to be using to submit samples of student work will look like. And so we appreciate him joining us today, and that'll be the last thing that we cover. So the IRB submission, really don't need to spend any more time on this. I think that everyone has said that they've either been submitted, and Larry and I have them, or we know that they're coming shortly. And we've got that initial deadline that we had set that's approaching next Monday. So unless there's any questions about the IRB submission or any concerns or whatnot, then we can kind of just blow right through this one. Anybody have anything that you need to ask or any questions or anything? Okay. What? There we go. All right.
All right. As we've talked about up until this point, we've kind of worked on the sampling methodology. And just as a reminder, again, we're looking at 400 documents for evaluation across the state. Each institution will collect 75 to 100 selected student documents from each institution. Sample drawn from students at sophomore or junior level, 42 to 72 hours complete at that point. No more than 10 to 15 documents from a single section, trying to diversify the sections from which the samples are drawn. No more than 1 document from the individual student. Did anybody have any questions about those things that we've talked about? Any concerns? Have you tried to do some trial runs on the sample?
This is, just to clarify, this is Sharon Bailey, that it does not matter what course the documents come from. They don't have to be core courses. They could be senior level courses as long as the students that they're drawing from are sophomores or juniors.
That is a question that we haven't talked about yet, Sharon, I don't think.
No, I think we had talked about this early on, and we originally, I think, had a limitation on to the core curriculum courses, but the 4-year institutions indicated that would be a very significant constraint on whether or not they'd be able to get the sample they needed. So I think that when we had talked about this previously, it's not listed as a constraint or a parameter here, so that it's not a constraint. If you do need to draw from upper division courses rather than core curriculum courses, that would be fine. The key thing, I think, that controls and kind of keeps those samples from kind of the same population of students is catching the students at the sophomore or junior level. So I think that we were using that third criteria that's listed there in that table to kind of give us a similar population rather than saying core curriculum courses. So I think, yeah, the short answer to that question, because I'm not necessarily good at those, The short answer is no, it does not have to be from core curriculum courses. It can be from any courses as long as it meets these parameters.
That works for me.
Question that Chris and I have exchanged emails on this week also is the time frame. If you look at the time frame listed there, spring 2016, summer 2016, fall 2016, is that problematic for anybody?
Yeah, and the idea there is that basically in which term did the student complete the work?
In anybody's rotation of collecting work for written communication, does your rotation fit in within that time frame?
We're going to have to collect them just for this. So we're going to have to do it in fall anyway, so we don't collect them otherwise.
Okay. Well, I think it may be if we start with spring, summer, or fall 2016, and that allows institutions some flexibility because we're planning to collect in the fall just for our own process. So it kind of dovetails with this pretty nicely. But I know that Larry had mentioned that they've got samples available from spring. Collecting again from the fall is not necessarily going to work. So I think if we start at least with the spring, summer, and fall of 2016 as a starting point, we can certainly discuss if that creates any issues for institutions. We can discuss anything outside of that time frame if it comes up.
Anybody from Arlington have a comment on that, or?
I am actually waiting for Lorraine to come with that answer. So for now, I don't have a response, but I think we do have what we need.
Okay.
I just need to verify with her.
All right, great. So any other comments, questions about the sampling? Chris, let me ask you this. On our, we backed off of essentially being a random sample, and we now say sample drawn from students. Let's see, that's not it. I'm looking for the right word. A selected student document. Are we asking everybody to submit a description of how those are selected?
That's one of the things that as we get into the fall that we likely will ask that. That is something that is going to be background information that's going to be necessary, I think, when we start writing up reports and describing this work of knowing how each institution went about, what process did they use to get those 75 to 100 documents.
Agreed. I think we need that information.
Yeah, and I've got a form that started that's based on the multi-state collaborative because they did exactly that.
Right.
And so, but yeah, that's something that as we get into the fall and actually get to the point of submission that, I do expect that we'll ask folks to detail that information.
Does everybody online agree that that would be something that we all need to submit?
I would think so from UT.
I would agree.
UT Arlington said no.
I think that that's something that that Lorraine and Julie would agree would be important.
All right, good. So any more questions or comments on this point? If not, I think we can move on.
Larry, this is Matt Cayley. I do just want to extend an offer beyond how you'd be using LiveText to collect the samples and do the sampling. We do have a tool that I can make available for that process so that you can kind of create these plans, these plan templates, and distribute down to each participating institution so they can kind of contribute to that template and push it back up to the organization.
Oh.
And allow you for data collection, allow you for some reporting, and really kind of create a systematic approach to this whole process on top of, and then ultimately the reports and the data that you get out of using LiveText for sampling, you can attach it back, integrate it back to the planning piece of it.
Great. Thank you, Matt.
No problem.
You remember last time Chris talked about the institutional profiles, and this is basically, again, just a follow-up on that. Case study for how your institution is implementing the value-based assessment for the core. There's a link there for a model of how to do these case studies. They would be published on the LEAP website. You could also submit them to AAC&U if you would be interested in doing that. There's not a set deadline, but prior to September the 30th will be helpful for AAC&U and also for LiveText's project as well. Any
I
questions?
understood. Yeah, I understood that that was an optional one.
Yes. Yeah, it was optional. It's something that we had talked about. If you have the opportunity, the interest in doing that, it is something that we would publish via LiveText, but which the institution could also submit to AAC&U. But no, it is absolutely 100% optional.
Yeah, I floated it to our faculty, and they seemed really, really uninterested. In fact, they were falling asleep on me.
Okay.
I guess we'll move on then. I'm going to take just a little bit of time to talk about scoring sessions versus calibration sessions. And scoring session concept is that all of the work on scoring the student work would be done during those sessions. Usually in scoring sessions you have a time at the beginning where calibration is done, but then also while everybody is there you score that work as well. Scoring sessions kind of have the advantage that you don't have folks leave those meetings and go off and get uncalibrated or have time lapses between the time they're calibrated and the time that they do their scoring. We at SFA do the CAT test, the critical thinking test from University of Tennessee, I believe it is. Those sessions are done in that way. We have to train the scorers, and then we have to score that the student work all together in those sessions. And the sessions may go over more than one day, and very often they do. They stretch out for a couple of days very often. Problem with that is, of course, you have to get everybody together there in those days and make sure that everybody is there and keep them captive during that time period. And that's a hard thing to do, especially during the academic year. It's a hard thing to do because people have to go to class, have to go to meetings, and that sort of thing. So finding the time to do that is difficult to do. The advantage of it is you can do checks as you go along to make sure that people are staying in calibration and people are scoring things the way that you have agreed on the way they should be scored. So there's an advantage to that. The time frame and the use of the time is difficult, and finding time to keep everybody together is a difficult thing to do. So you may get better inter-coder reliability scores that way, but the inconvenience in keeping everybody together is a difficult thing to do. Chris, you want to talk about scoring?
Yeah, and it's actually those challenges that you're talking about of keeping everybody together, which is why at San Jac we've actually gone towards a calibration session. And I don't know if this distinction is made anywhere else. It's just one that I've started realizing as we've implemented here because of the exact challenges that Larry mentioned, that we're not able, when we're talking about at the scale that that we're assessing, we're collecting roughly about 1,200 documents every year to assess against 3 different outcomes, and we have, in order for those to be read by 2 to 3 different evaluators, it requires about 160 faculty. And getting those groups of faculty, even if we were to divide them up, getting a group of 50 faculty together for a scoring session is just not feasible. And so the approach we've taken is the calibration session. And we do, typically calibration sessions look a lot like a scoring session, except that the sessions are shorter, and at the end of them, faculty go off and they on their own, and all of this scoring is done asynchronously. So our sessions typically start with anywhere from 1 or 2 student samples that everyone in the room assesses independently, and then we start looking at finding the groups of faculty that assessed it one way versus the groups that assessed it a different way, and then we start talking about why they assessed it differently in order to identify potential different interpretations and applications of the rubric. And when we find 2 equally valid but different interpretations, then we collectively make a decision. How are we as an institution going to apply that, apply the rubric in that instance, and then we document that decision in what we call an institutional interpretation document. And so it really becomes kind of this living document that is an ongoing definition of an extension of the rubric of exactly how it's going to be applied. The best example of that I could give is the first time we did written communication. I had one session in particular that I had about 20 different faculty in, and they're all looking at the same sample of student work, and 10 of them had given it like a 2 or a 3, and 10 of them had given it a 0 on the rubric. And the reason why, it was on the control of syntax or grammar, and those that were giving it a 2 or a 3 were reading the rubric very literally, and they were seeing fragments and run-ons, but according to the rubric that that's allowable as long as it doesn't interfere with the meaning or interpreting meaning. And the ones that had given it a 0, it said there were run-ons and fragments, and so that's not successful writing in any shape, form, or fashion. And so then we made a decision as an institution how to apply that specific standard at that level. But what happens then after that is the faculty then, those sessions typically last about 2 to 3 hours tops. And faculty then are doing their evaluations of the documents on their own with the aid of the rubric and the institutional interpretation. The upside is that it's been more scalable because we've been able to include 160 faculty in the scoring process. The downside is that it, as Larry mentioned, the strength of the scoring session is that it may give you better intercoder reliability. We know that the calibration sessions make the intercoder reliability more of a challenge because there's not that synchronous scoring that goes on for which there's continuous ongoing calibration. You end up with individual faculty off on their own scoring, so if there's miscalibrations, you're not going to know it until you have the completed work. So the question is, which of those 2 approaches I don't know that there's really a definitive answer to, as to which one of those is most appropriate or better for this project, both short-term and long-term. So we wanted to pose that question to this group and get your insights. The effect on this project would be a scoring session would require, when we start looking at a pre-conference kind of workshop for this project at the LEAP Texas Forum next February, the scoring session would require probably an 8-hour pre-conference workshop in which all evaluators are in the same space, and we're doing our absolute very best to do all of the scoring at the same time. The calibration session would require maybe a 4-hour session, 3 to 4 hour session in which we get through as much calibration as possible, but for which we expect afterwards evaluators are going to be doing assessment on their own. So the question is kind of which direction or which approach do you use or do you have familiarity with, and which do you think would be maybe a better approach that we might lean in that direction for this project?
Chris, can you hear me?
We can.
Chris?
Yes.
This is Lorraine. Hey, you know, it would help me to see, right now it seems like based on what y'all have explained so far about LiveText, it might, I mean, it seems like what we want is a calibration session, but I don't have a very good vision of what LiveText is going to be like yet, and that might help us make the final decision on this. That's just my thoughts.
Okay. Yeah, well, and for today's demo, I don't know if I think we were going to get far enough into LiveText to see what the submission of student documents was going to look like. I don't think we had planned to get to the point of what the evaluation would look like for evaluators.
Oh, okay.
I kind of fall back to the question of how does the multi-state collaborative do it? And they do calibration sessions, right, Chris?
Yeah, they do calibration. They bring it, but their calibration sessions are much, much longer than what we could do. They bring everybody together for a 2 to 3 day period, and they do 2 to 3 days of calibration. And then the evaluators do their evaluations after the fact, asynchronously. But as they're doing it, the multi-state collaborative is monitoring and watching for, I guess, monitoring the integrated reliability in an ongoing manner. And if they see, I believe if they see an evaluator that seems to be performing differently or seems to be an outlier in comparison to others, then they may do recalibration with that individual. I just don't know how, given I guess given the structure and the time and the staffing involved to do what they do, I don't know how scalable for us that is.
Well, and to be honest with you, I mean, we do calibration sessions for core assessment. After a while, people just get tired of doing the sample scoring.
Right.
And they want to get on with the business of doing the actual scoring. If you stretch it out over 3 days, 2 or 3 days, I can't figure out how they keep people involved.
Well, there's just no way for us to do that, because they're providing, they're covering travel costs and lodging, and they're. I'm
not talking about physically. I'm talking about mentally, how you keep people involved.
I have to agree with Larry. My faculty have never done, at least not that I know of, they're not doing, multiple scores for assessment. And I think if we ask them to sit all together to go through, 400 documents, they would say, this is really horrible. No wonder we don't do this.
No,
never do it again.
Yeah, no, the way it wouldn't be everyone going through that many documents. It would essentially be that, and I was trying to pull this up, it's getting in the way.
Right. I mean,
the way that would be is that there would be a group of 2 to 3 that would be assessing about 30 documents each, and maybe not exactly within the implementation, but you've essentially got 2 to 3 evaluators on each document. So they would only be doing about 30 to 40 each. So it certainly wouldn't be that much. It might be something that we could do within a single day, within about a 4 to 6 hour period. So I think that the scoring session might be feasible for us. It's just a much longer session than the calibration session. But that's the current short-term situation. We've also got to think about long-term. If this project's going to be sustainable, will we always be able to maintain kind of the process that we set up for this year?
I'm kind of hoping that the faculty, after having done this, the faculty come back and want to do it, and when it's not as part of this group, and I can see them buying into that with a calibration session, and I could see them saying after having done calibration sessions a few times, pointing out, oh, this is problematic, we should probably go to scoring sessions. But I don't see them being excited if they start with scoring sessions. Does that make sense?
No, I agree. I agree with that. That makes perfect sense.
And I would like them to be excited. So.
Yeah, one of the things that I would like to see come out of this, and I don't see it coming out of the multi-state collaborative just yet, but is something like or comparable to, analogous to what we locally call an institutional interpretation. And that is, some sort of kind of broader perspective on how to interpret the rubrics. I had mentioned earlier that kind of that example of, I had 20 different faculty in a room that disagreed over how to apply the rubric on control of syntax and mechanics, and that some of them were seeing run-ons and fragments, so that was automatically a 0 for them. Other faculty reading the rubric said, well, the rubric says that, it generally conveys meaning, though there may be some errors. They said, well, a run-on here, there, kind of affects, I see it, but it doesn't really interfere with meaning. And so what ended up coming out of that, and I just added this to the presentation, is that on our institutional interpretation under control of syntax and mechanics, we have this explanation. And so this is how our faculty collectively decided. And of course, we do multiple calibration sessions because we have 3 locations, and we try to include as many faculty as possible. So we carry this interpretation from one calibration session to the next and have all the faculty participating kind of vet and validate and agree with this. But basically, if you get down to that issue and you're trying to figure out what to do with typos or sentence structure or run-ons or omitted commas or comma splices, the rubric doesn't articulate exactly how to handle those situations, but our institutional interpretation does. And so I would very much like to see us document, at least whether we do scoring or calibration, to document these things that come out because of those calibration sessions, because it provides some guidance and some context to local institutions as to how a broader array of institutions are interpreting the rubric. But then it also informs from year over year kind of the multi-institutional assessment process, that we don't have to start over from scratch every time we assess written communication. We've got the interpretation documented.
But for my faculty, the more valuable outcome is going to be having experienced reaching that consensus.
Right. And my expectation is that consensus, what I've just put on the screen here, that's our local consensus. Whatever comes up out of the Texas Assessment Collaborative might be different. But yeah, it would be the faculty in the room that drive that consensus and determine how the Texas Assessment Collaborative is going to interpret the rubric. And if it's different from this one, different from the way San Jack is currently interpreting it, to me that's fantastic, because then I'll bring that back to our local faculty and say, well, this is how we're interpreting it. But when we had a group of faculty from 4 community colleges and 4 universities interpreting it, this is what they did. What do you think we should do, if anything?
So I guess this will be the last time I argue for the calibration rather than scoring. My suspicion is that the calibration is going to be the much more exciting part, where people are, forming the consensus and thinking over the issues, and that as you shift from calibration into scoring, it's going to become, for the faculty, much more just drudgery. That said, we may want to score them all at LiveText at the annual meeting so that we don't have people just not doing it once they return home, because it is just drudgery.
Yeah, and I would say from our experience, that's definitely an issue, is that we set up, we have the calibration sessions, and then we get around to kind of this final, all right, go, leave here and go evaluate. And we allow, at least locally, because it's in the middle of a semester, we allow 2 to 3 weeks for that to be done, and we inevitably end up, life happens for faculty, and whether it's something with their work schedule, their home schedule, family medical emergencies and stuff like that, that they can't get the work done. So that is an issue or a challenge with calibration sessions. But I agree, the scoring sessions, it does start to become a grind. Okay, well, we certainly don't have to reach a decision point today. It's something that as Larry and I started talking about it, we wanted to put in front of you so that you can start thinking about the distinction between scoring sessions and calibration sessions. And as we get into the fall and we start making more on-point preparations for the LEAP Texas Forum and the Texas Assessment Collaborative at that forum, then we'll start discussing this more and start reaching a final decision on which direction to go. Larry, would you want to talk about the demographic data?
I think we have talked some about what demographic data we want to collect, and we do want to kind of narrow that down and to clearly identify which demographic data we're going to be collecting. That data will come in with the samples as they come in, and they're there basically for descriptive purposes. We're not really going to try to disaggregate by those demographic categories necessarily, because sample small, trying to generalize from that and breaking it down into smaller groups would be even more difficult. So if you look at the screen, you can see the type of demographic data that we would be looking for. And I think most of these we have talked about before and agreed on. Does anybody see anything there that is problematic or of concern to you, or is there something missing?
Well, and I'll jump in and kind of explain the first, 4 columns in terms of ID, student first name, student last name, and email. I think the expectation right now, and this is after Larry and Matthew and I met at the SAC-COC Summer Institute and started working through some of this stuff and have been working since, is that those first 4 columns would actually stay, when you submit it, would stay exactly as you see them on screen. Each institution will have a range of 100 student ID numbers, and you can leave the first name as student, the last name is, like we have it here, last1001, which that's all that gets submitted to LEAP Texas. The email stays the same as well. Now, on your end, you will know which student and which student sample is ID student 100001. All LEAP Texas will ever know, all that will ever get submitted to the student, to us though, is that ID number and the demographic information. So if you wanted, once you get the results back, you'll know the results for that first student ID number, and you'll be able to match that up if you want to on your back end with which sample you submitted, so that you can use that data internally however you choose. But LEAP Texas will never know any sort of identifying information, first name, last name, email, or anything for your specific students. The only thing we'll know is that it's you submitted as 1000001. They have this demographic information, and then we'll have however their assessment turned out. So I wanted to say that so that we don't focus on those first 4 columns, because that's really not consequential to the conversation. It's that demographic data that you see in the other columns that Larry was talking about that we want to focus on.
Here's some questions back there in the background. Rain, was that your group asking some questions?
No, we're on mute. We're just listening.
Okay, I thought I heard somebody discussing something.
No, I think that was background, not the background conversation here.
Okay. So does anybody have any comments about that information, the demographic information that we would be looking for?
I don't have a question. I have a question, actually, not a comment. I'm looking here at birthday, gender, race, ethnicity, etc. What are the coding values that you want to use for those? Are we going to have a standard set of coding values, or just whatever we use in our ERP? How are we going to deal with those?
Yeah, we'll have coding standards and exactly the formatting and stuff once we get to the point or before we get to the point of submission.
Are all of us using Banner?
No. We're using Poise, which is like living in the dark ages.
Some days it feels like Banner's in the dark ages too.
We're using PeopleSoft. But we could use the CBM coding for gender, race, ethnicity.
I was thinking either CBM or iPads.
Probably, I wonder if iPads would be more universal. Any thought on that, Lorraine?
I hadn't really thought of it before either, honestly.
Well, and for me, it's something, when we start trying to tack that down, that's something that I would probably talk to my research office here to get a better understanding of what we would be. I mean, I'm sure we could use both, but I would have to learn more about the 2 standards, the CBM or the iPads, in order to really make a decision or to form an opinion on it.
I know we're in the middle of switching strategic plans in the state, and I don't know if the way that these things get reported in our accountability system are going to have any kind of shift after we do the 60x30 Texas accountability measures. From a draft thing that the coordinating board sent out recently, it didn't look like there was going to be a change in those sections. But since we are we are a Texas-centric operation in this case. I mean, maybe we really should think about letting our race and ethnicity information mimic what would go into an accountability system report.
Yeah, my first inclination was to use the state standard.
Yeah. Yeah, Melissa was just sitting here saying it does bring a certain amount of consistency to do it that way. And again, I guess we don't have to decide this very minute. The big thing that you have to decide is making sure that we give you the information in the way that you can use it best.
Right, and also, is there a glaring something missing, or are we okay?
The only thing that we had mentioned that Melissa's sitting here being the good student looking at our notes from the last meeting, And she was like, hey, we did mention Pell eligible. I don't know if we want to stick with that or not.
We have it there.
Oh, okay. We just can't see it, I guess.
Pell eligibility. It's like on the second. Can you
Got it. Thank you. Yes, I got it. Very good.
Yeah, and
now we can't do first gen here.
Right. It would be, for real quick on the Pell eligibility, I think what we had talked about too is using the same standard. I think that Multi-State Collaborative is using, and that's not if the student is currently Pell eligible, but if they've ever been Pell eligible.
Gotcha.
And then on the first generation, that was mentioned. I had that kind of in brackets or parentheses, and that's if we include something like that that not every institution can get to, it could be the standard indicates that if you're not able to report it, that one of the things that you just enter into that field unable to report.
Mm-hmm.
Agreed.
I'm looking at the CB1 table right now, and it has, I don't know all their codes, so they may be here and I'm just not recognizing it, but I don't see Pell eligibility unless it's in that particular semester, and I don't see first gen. So getting the students who are Pell eligible in the semester that you draw the table is easy, but getting it for all, forever, that's a little harder. But all the rest is right there on CB1.
Right, and we
Lorraine.
Yeah.
Your institution does not keep track of whether your students are first generation students or not?
Not in a way that's dependable with integrity, no.
Wow.
It's on their apps. That's it. Self-report on the app.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What do you do?
Well, it's a self-report, yeah.
Is it self-report on the app?
Yes.
That's what we do too.
I don't know if that we consider that really dependable data, but I mean, it's there. We have self-report on the app, so I have that.
We consider it, I guess, to be reliable data because we report it all the time.
Well, we find ourselves needing it a lot too, and it's what we use when we have to. It's just, sometimes those questions go unanswered on the apps and that kind of thing.
Yep. I got you.
It sounds like conceptually we're good with kind of these fields at least, and we can start working through the questions that you guys have raised now is what are the reporting standards and the actual coding standards for each field.
Sounds good.
Okay. All right. Well, then we will move along so that we have enough time. And I need to jump over and let me make Matthew the presenter so that he can share his screen.
So try to get your available contact today. I make them call you back.
Okay. Are you able to see my screen, Chris?
Yes, I can.
Okay. All right, awesome. So I'm not going to spend much time in PowerPoint here. So I'm really just going to walk through a couple of different things. The idea of just logging into each contributing institution, logging into their basically their submission domain to submit their artifact. The couple of clicks it'll take to submit each artifact, each student artifact, and then if time allows here, I'll just take through the remaining steps that Chris and Larry will do in terms of creating that sampling pool and then distributing them to those trained raters. So it should only take a couple of minutes. So I'm going to skip a lot of what LiveText has to offer, obviously, and go right to the core of it.
Yeah, and we don't even need to get to the sampling pool and stuff that Larry or I can do. We can do that offline at another time.
Okay, so very simply, we're a hosted solution, so as long as you got an access to a device, it could be mobile or it could be on your PC, Mac, you'll log into your to each LiveText submission account at livetext.com. Once you've logged in, you'll appear in this dashboard view that you're seeing right here on the screen, which will show you essentially the list of assignments that you're asking to submit based under. So, I mean, I have it titled Texas Assessment Collaborative Submission. We might retitle it Written Communication Artifact. So we'll work on that in the back end. But as soon as you log in to submit that individual student artifact, you'll be able to see in red that you need to take that next step to submit the artifact. You click on Begin Assignment, and you'll simply have any description instructions that Larry, Chris, that you want to put in here would be a description to each submitter, and then you would go into Attach, pull a file from, in this case, it will be from your computer. It certainly could be within your LiveText account as well, but I think most likely it will come out of your computer, and you would just grab a document as part of your attachment, click Attach, verify, and once that artifact's been uploaded, which should only take a couple of seconds, you'll click on Submit Assignment.
Yeah, hang on. I think the screen share may be going a lot slower than.
Okay. All right. I'm used to WebEx, so we found the flaw in GoToMeetings.
Yeah.
All right. No worries. All right. So just taking a step back. So once you're in that login, you're inside that submission view. You'll see this assignment tile here. So this tile will direct you to go ahead and do that submission. Click on Begin Assignment. You'll have that assignment view, that submission view up. You'll have some descriptions and instructions here just to confirm the role that you're playing. You'll go down to Attachment List, click on Attachment, upload an item from your computer, from your hard drive, Dropbox, grab that document. It'll take a couple of seconds to upload. Once it's there, it will confirm that the upload's been complete. You'll click Attach. And now you'll see that, in this case, I've gone through it twice, but you'll have a single or multiple artifacts sitting here. So I believe, Chris and Larry, it'll be one document, right, per submission. So that attached document will live here. If you've made a mistake, attach the wrong document, you can always just delete out the wrong document. And then once you've confirmed that you have your document, again, you're free to write any comments as well. And then you'll just move to the red button in the bottom right, which is Submit Assignment, Confirmation, Submit. Once you hit OK, it'll pop back to your dashboard, and it'll verify that you've submitted that assignment, and that assignment now sits in yellow, and that's it. You're done with that process as a submitter for each student.
And so they'll have, are we going to have, as whenever I'm working to submit the samples that we have, am I going to have a box like this for each sample that I need to submit?
Each sample is going to be, because we want that demographic data associated with each submission, then it'll be a login for each submission.
A login for each submission. Okay.
And if there's a decision that you only want one artifact per submission, one Word document, for instance, per submission, we can change the settings on the submission portal so that it says that one attachment was required, no more, no less.
Okay.
So once that mechanism is completed of attaching that file, hitting the submit button, that artifact is now collected and available in the sampling tool so that you can query all the samples as many times as you want, create as many pools as you want.
Right.
So at that point, now we moved off from the responsibilities role we're asking each institution to play, and now you, Chris, and Larry would live in this sampling domain account here, in which you can now pull those samples together.
Right. And so the process we just saw that we're talking about for institution, we're talking maybe couple of 3 minutes to submit each document for student, and some of that depends on how fast your internet connection is at the time.
Pretty much. I'd say three minutes should be definitely at the high end of the scale.
Okay. Does anybody have any kind of questions? Again, this is just kind of a high level first glance at kind of the LiveText system that we'll be using for the submissions. As we start to get into the fall, what Larry and I will be working to do is to kind of flesh this out in much more detail and have very specific documents that detail, here's step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, in order to submit a document. And we'll have that available to you so that you can get those submitted sometime during the fall, but probably no later than beginning of December-ish.
And there'll be a LiveText support as well, Chris. So, you know, if someone's in midst of trying to submit something and they run into some sort of issue, they, you know, we'll supply a LiveText support phone number so they can just call in and they can, and live support can walk them through that submission step if they run into any issues.
Okay, any questions?
Any concerns?
That's a better question.
It's Lorraine. I bet we talked about this. But since I'm working on SACS compliance, I've quit remembering things. I think we said we're not turning in the assignment with the assignment prompt with the assignment itself that the student was the student artifact. Is that what we said?
Run that by me again.
Well, I mean, in other words, I know we're going to submit whatever it is, 75 student artifacts, pieces of student work, but we're not necessarily going to have to submit the assignment prompt to you. Is that right? I just want to make sure I remember how this works.
Yeah, I don't know that we've addressed that on point, but I know that the multi-state collaborative, their practice is that the assignment, the prompt to which the student was responding, is not submitted with the assignment.
Okay, just a little double check.
Yeah, the only issue that creates is that, and for written communication, it's probably a safer assumption or presumption just because of the nature of the outcome. If we don't have the assignment submitted with the prompt, there's a presumption that the assignment is a valid assignment that is aligned to the rubric, and that the assignment to which the student was responding asks students to perform in a way that the rubric expects. Without submitting the assignment, we're just kind of, as a group and as the project, just kind of assumes that it's a valid aligned assignment. That's the only hesitation of not having it. But with written communication, as long as the students are, providing a written response to a prompt that requires some sort of use of sources or evidence, then pretty much anything will match the rubric to that point.
Okay.
I think that'll be, I'm not as concerned about it from written communication for that reason. When we start getting into the future and we're looking at things like social responsibility or personal responsibility and, or even maybe to a lesser extent critical thinking and teamwork, then that validity isn't necessarily assuming or presuming that all the assignments submitted to the project were in response to valid assignments that were aligned to the rubric isn't necessarily a safe assumption. So it may be something we revisit in the future.
Thanks.
Okay. Well, if we don't have any questions about that, then next steps, the only thing upcoming that we have specifically is just finishing up on the IRB institutional approval. That original deadline that we set is next Monday. And then Larry and I have started kind of discussing, and we've got some notes from this spring about any upcoming web meetings that we'll have around this project. And we've already mentioned several things that we've got to address in terms of the data files to be submitted, the coding standards, and then also looking at more specifics on how to submit the samples, and then working through that, and then discussing the calibration and scoring sessions. So he and I will be working on a schedule for those kind of upcoming web meetings, and we'll be getting in touch. So other than that, does anybody have any other questions or concerns or discussions for the good of the group?
I just want to make sure that you'll pop this up on our website, this webinar.
No, will do.
Okay, awesome.
And if anybody has any questions or that come up afterwards, then here's our emails and stuff again. And we will...
Going back to what you were saying about aligning the assignment to the rubric and whether we need to see the assignment or not, if those considerations came up for discussion during calibration, I would consider this project a real success.
Okay.
I think it would be fantastic to hear our faculty saying, well, can we score these without knowing what the assignment is, and hearing them debate with each other whether they could or not. For me, that would be the ultimate success.
Right. Yeah, and we did address the assignment design issue in the webinars earlier this past spring, and the need to make sure that the assignments are aligned. But that's absolutely something I'm sure will come up during the calibration sessions as well.
But my faculty didn't participate in those discussions.
Right.
And and us here talking among ourselves, we're the choir.
Right. Yeah, no, I'm sure those will come up during the calibration session as well.
Yeah. So that I say that just to say this isn't something that we among ourselves need to decide, because it's important that the faculty also think about those types of decisions, the people who aren't in this meeting right now.
Right. Okay. All right. Well, then we will see you guys next time.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.